I know this
Title
is very clickbaity, so I'll keep the intro brief. The albums I'm going to be talking about today aren't necessarily the sort of most critically acclaimed or like the best albums, but they're just albums that I think were either overlooked, underrated, or albums that I think I have like a kind of point on that maybe people aren't touching on too much, or maybe that relate to me in like an interesting way. Like I can tell an interesting story about them. So if you're looking for a review of Don't Tap the Glass by Tyler the Creator, that's not going to be on here because realistically, what can I add to that? It's good. Like, what do you need me to tell you? The Clips record is good? No, you don't. It's good. Listen to it. You've probably already listened to it. And yeah, I think it's a bit of a given. But these are all my opinions. And if you disagree with me and you don't like what I'm talking about, that's fine. I'm just letting you know my perspective. And yeah, please respect that. Anyway, on with the video. Honorable mentions: Speed Round, Pinball 2 by Mike and Tony Seltzer, good album. Songs About Jane by Say So Cupid, good album movie. The Pilot by Mavi, very good album. Token of Appreciation and Conversational Pieces by Boldy James, good albums. Right, let's get into the meat and potatoes. I think the only Gold Link song I could name before May of this year was Crew. So I'm pretty surprised myself that I put his album on my list, but I have. Enoch by Goldlink is 28 minutes and 45 seconds of serious bops, and it is one of the albums that I revisited most throughout this year. I discovered this album through the Catronada produced track Aventador. Honorable mention: Speed Round, Catronada Ain't No Damn Way. But yeah, I think the production on this record is what stands out to me as the most interesting thing. There are so many ideas, genres, styles kind of used all in once. It almost seems like experimental at times. That might be a bit of a step too far, but I just think everything is blended really, really well. And Goldlink just fits so well on every instrumental as a vocalist. Every time I put this album on, I want to start dancing. So if you've got 30 minutes in your day and you want to dance, put it on, you'll have a good time. Speaking of a good time, the new Omni album.
Send a promise to my girl, she look at me like, where this money at? I don't feel like wasting any time, this where my trust in that.
I first got into Omni back in 2022 when I heard their song Nerd for the first time, and ever since then I've been a very big fan. Their last outing especially was an album that I really, really enjoyed, and I'm glad to say that they've only improved since then. Peach Boys by Omni feels like a much more concise and better constructed version of their previous two albums, and it achieves this without sacrificing any length or song duration. Like really, I think the difference between this album and the last album is like 10 seconds or something. Like it's incredible how they've managed to use the same amount of runtime to just make such a more concise effort. Do you know what I mean? If you haven't heard of Omni, they're a hip-hop group based out of Georgia. That's Georgia in the US, not the country. And their music is kind of like the logical amalgamation and conclusion of all southern rap styles, if that makes sense. Like the DNA of their music takes so much inspiration from such a wide source of influences in that space. If you like southern rap, you'll like this shit. Just like the Goldlink album, it's like 30 minutes long, so just put it on and yeah, serious bops. It's what I play when I'm on my way to work and I know I'm gonna have a really long shift. Subscribe so I can stop working in a pub. The next album I want to talk about is Blush by Kevin Abstract. I have to be careful with how I talk about this album because at first I didn't really get it. Not that there's some deeper meaning or story that you have to sit down and digest, but more so I didn't understand what this album was meant to be. I think that came down to me though. I think that I came in with a very limiting view on what an album could be, and only now looking back do I see what I was missing. I think this is what people were expecting from a sort of post-Brockhampton Kevin Abstract solo album. But the thing is, it doesn't really feel like a solo album at all. The concept behind Blush is that it's an evolving project rather than like a singular release. It's not just a collection of songs, it's a collection of many different collaborations, if that makes sense. The best way I would describe it would be saying that it's like a greatest hits album from a plethora of collaborative projects that Kevin Abstract has had in the works. I think this album is very current, if that makes sense. In the age of social media and short attention spans, creating a project with lots of variety but also lots of shared connected tissue is such a great idea. But the album itself is also really good. I love the appearances made by Dominic Fike, Love Spells, and Quedeca, who actually executive produced the album, as well as the other collaborators who made this project super exciting to listen to. Although I do think the Amir Van inclusions are odd. It's just one of those things where I'm just reminded of the messiness of the Brockhampton breakup every time he makes an appearance. But maybe that's a me problem. I also think that the existence of this album retroactively makes Kevin's last album even better. I remember some people were quite disappointed in how that album sounded, because it wasn't what I think people would expect from like a Kevin Abstract solo record. Like it had its own, he was trying something new basically. But now hopefully they can appreciate both albums, now that the kind of more traditional Kevin Abstract album does exist. At least sonically, this is more traditionally Kevin Abstract, I guess. And that kind of, his previous album, Blanket, can just exist as like a phase of his experimentation that I like, so I'm not mad. Speed Round, Star by Two Hollis, good album. Fingers Crossed by Quezzy, good album. I Kinda Fucking Love You by Death to Ricky, good album. Oi by YT, good album. There's a fly flying around my house right now, so I hope it doesn't pop into frame or get picked up on the mic. If it does, just know it was planted by the US government. Black British Music 2025 by Jim Legxacy was one of my most anticipated albums of this year. Like most people, I heard about Jim through his track Father and the accompanying music video on the Lausse channel. I think the visuals of that video, as well as Jim's emotional vocals contrasting against the beat, are really what interested me about him. It was clear that he was being really intentional with everything he was doing, and he had a vision for this album that was more than just a collection of songs. People have already talked about how great this record is ad nauseum, but I think I have a very unique perspective on this because, as you can see, I'm British. Going into this record, I had some expectations about what I thought the album would sound like and what the lyrics would be about. And I maybe think that was because of the name of the album, but also I think at the time I was listening to a lot of Pink Floyd and Kendrick Lamar. So I was kind of in the headspace of listening to very like political, socially conscious music. And Black British Music is that, but it's also not that. It's so much more than that, actually. Jim excellently captures where he is emotionally throughout the track list. This album isn't commenting on what it's like to be black and British, but instead, Jim communicates to the listener how it actually feels to be black and British. I obviously won't be able to understand what that's truly like, but I will say that Jim's incredible songwriting does strike a chord that even I find heart-wrenching and relatable, despite not having his exact perspective. This album is This fucking fly, man. This album is a benchmark of where UK hip-hop is headed. Jim is not only pushing the sound forward, but he's also weaving in the history of the genre. As someone who grew up listening to a lot of grime and UK hip-hop, there are so many references stitched into this album that show that Jim really understands the space he's in. If you're a fan of UK hip-hop, or just a fan of hip-hop in general, and you haven't heard this album, you really are missing out. You've got to check it out. An album that also weaves in the history of this genre is By British by Afro Surrealist.
By British, 2K25, fucking live.
To say I went into this record blind was an understatement. I had never heard anything by Afro Surrealist and I didn't know anything about the album, but let me fill you in. Afro Surrealist is a producer from London. I think East London, but don't quote me on that. He got his start reworking classic grime tracks, and from what I can gather, this is his first album of fully original material. I wouldn't really expect an album by a producer with loads of featured artists to have so many consistent themes throughout the track list, but this album has loads of consistent themes. I really like how from track to track we get to hear so many different perspectives and stories from each lyricist, each tying into the overall portrait of the Black British experience. I think though, if there's one feature who's the MVP, it is Sibo. All his appearances are phenomenal. I want to highlight the verse on Boys Don't Cry because that might be one of my favourite verses of the year. It's simultaneously exciting and moving, especially paired with that instrumental. And yeah, it's basically a given in this case, but the production is excellent. I'm really excited to see where Afro Surrealist goes from here. This is another UK hip-hop album that just shows that the genre is in a great place and has a very bright future. The next album I want to talk about is Life of a Showgirl by Taylor Swift. Sorry to all the Swifties out there, but that was a joke. I just needed something to help me make the transition between these two albums less jarring. So I'd always considered myself one of those people who listened to everything. I know everyone claims this, but then if you quiz them on country or ambient, they just completely fall apart. And for me, the one genre I didn't really listen to at all was metal. I kind of just thought it was noisy cringe. I didn't even really realize that some of the experimental music that I listened to was influenced by metal. I had no idea. But this all changed on the 28th of June when, at UFC 317, my GOAT, Peyton Talbot, walked out to his fight against Felipe Lima. His walkout song was a remix of a song that Nick Diaz used to walk out to back in the early 2000s. So, in my curiosity, I went and watched one of Nick Diaz's old walkouts, and this song that he walked out to single-handedly sold me on metal as a genre, but more specifically, sold me on the guys who made it. The song in question, Fate to Sarah. The band, Deftones. Private Music by Deftones is the first album by the group in 5 years, and in my opinion, it's their best since White Pony. There are so many instant classic songs on this release that still feel fresh, even though the band has been making music since before I was born. Not only did they come with some of the most hard-hitting tracks on this release, such as My Mind is a Mountain and Infinite Source, but even some of the slower and more emotional cuts on this thing are phenomenal. I Think About You All the Time is one of my favourite Deftones songs of all time. This album feels fresh, without straying too far from the sound the band is known for, and it feels familiar without retreading any old ground. This is a must-listen for a fan of Deftones, and Deftones are a must-listen for a fan of metal. I actually nearly made a video earlier this year about getting into metal as a genre, and that was honestly all because of this band. So if you've never listened to them, I can't recommend this album enough. Fucking sick. Fucking this fly, bro. Bitch. Oh, I got him. Oh, he escaped. Fucking bastard. Speed Round, Blair Babies by SIBO. This album is what I expected Black British music to be, in the sense that it's very politically motivated. I would have loved to give this album a bit more of a review, but I don't think I've had enough time to sit with it and digest what he's talking about in this album. Voyeurism by Wrath, good album. The Sword and the Soaring by Navy Blue, good album. Psycho Warrior MG Ultra X by Machine Girl. This was like the second Machine Girl album I ever listened to, and it's awesome. I'm still only just getting into Machine Girl, but this was a really good album to start with. Now, I'm very excited to talk about the next album on this list because I consider it a perfect album and I think it's an instant classic. The album is Slugger by Derby. Derby? I'm British, so I don't know how to say it. Dorby?
I can't let you see me like that, sweetheart. Drinking and screaming and making a scene in the yard. There won't be a hateful bone in your casket. Meanwhile, they bury me a bastard.
I first found Derby through his appearance on Blush, and the song he was on, I Wasn't There, became one of my favourites on the album, so I thought it probably only made sense to check out his solo work. Slugger has some of the best songwriting of the year and some of the best instrumentation to boot. It's hard to say what makes this album so special. I think you just have to listen to it and allow yourself to be immersed in his lyricism and his guitar. Using these, Derby paints a very vivid picture. When a song like Gold comes on, I can picture Derby sat in the car waiting for his lover. It's like I'm actually there in the back seat, just kind of twiddling my thumbs. You can tell he studied at the Dijon and Frank Ocean production school, but it never feels like he's copying them. Mainly because he's taking elements from their styles, but he's going in a completely unique direction. It's also because he's such a good writer. Not just his lyricism, but how he attaches words to melodies. They're so intimate and beautiful. There isn't another album like Slugger, and I don't think there will be for a while. Right from the get-go, you're immediately immersed in the song Deer in the Belly of the Snake. The melody is simultaneously simple and catchy, but also immersive and captivating. You're then thrown straight into Money Fight, which is a super interesting and engaging song, both in lyrics and instrumentation, and the metaphor of a money fight to describe this relationship just gives the song so much colour. And then from there, the song just throws great song after great song at you. I'm not sure if this makes sense, but this album really makes you feel the brutality of love. It's painful, but it's beautiful, and it's sharp, but it's soothing. By the time you reach the end of the record, it's beautiful and bittersweet, perfectly bittersweet, I'd say. This album makes me want to yearn for someone so badly. It makes me want to burn myself down just to light up someone else, devoting myself to someone so completely as Derby is devoted to Jenny. This album will be an album I revisit for the rest of my life. It's absolutely beautiful. And beyond that, I can't wait to see where Derby goes next. Absolutely amazing. When we look back on music in 2025, a lot of artists will be remembered for making a very big splash, whether it's Geese with their latest record, or maybe it's Dijon and McGee for their work with Bieber and Bon Iver. But in the hip-hop genre, there's only one name that comes to mind for making a big splash this year. They stand above all newcomers as the biggest breakout artist of this year, undeniably I'd say. In my opinion, it's one of the most surprising rises in popularity I've ever seen, but it's well deserved. At the beginning of this year, this artist was a relative unknown, and now has more monthly listeners than Wu-Tang Clan, Chief Keef, Ice Cube, Baby Keem, Rick Ross, 2 Chainz, Quavo, Ludacris, DMX, even Clips. I could keep talking about how impressive this rise has been this year, but I'd rather get into the phenomenal album that this artist dropped. The breakout artist I'm of course talking about is EsDeekid.
Okay.
Rebel by EsDeekid lives up to the hype and then delivers even more than you expected. Coming in at just over 20 minutes in length, it's a record that doesn't even waste your time and delivers its feelings of excitement and confidence immediately. Every instrumental lasts exactly as long as it needs to, never overstaying its welcome and never under-delivering. The pacing is phenomenal. Speaking of the instrumentals, they're so hard. Each beat is similar enough so that the sound profile of the record is perfectly consistent, yet each song feels distinct. I feel like that's maybe the best strength of the record overall, the balance it achieves. As a listener, you'll never feel bored. It's perfectly constructed and sequenced. As a vocalist, EsDeekid is also amazing. I don't want to make it seem like the production on this record carries him, because it certainly doesn't. His ability to consistently change up his flow across a track without losing the listener is pretty impressive. His delivery is always very energetic, which is something I don't think you always get from these kind of underground rageous rappers. I'm going to draw a bit of a weird comparison here. This album reminds me of Illmatic by Nas in a lot of ways. Obviously the two albums are very sonically different, but I think they're similar when it comes to more intangible aspects of art. I mentioned the pacing already, but I think both of these records are very self-aware in the sense that they both know where they're strongest and how to play into those strengths. Also, the features on this thing are just as good. Big shout out to Rico Ace, especially as he makes the most appearances aside from EsDeekid on this album. I will say that some of the recent reactions to this album have been odd. A lot of people have been posting recently about EsDeekid being cringe or having like a really cringe fan base, and to be honest with you, I think that is kind of stupid. It's not only stupid, it's kind of like hypocritical. Obviously I understand that these kids, and that's what they are, they're just kids really. I understand they might post cringe or make like corny content about being a fan of EsDeekid, but are you really telling me you can't ignore that? Like, you can't ignore the posts of children in like the face of a really good album. Like, is that where we're at? Seriously? Are you really gonna let children impact how you listen to music? Are you a parent? Are you a parent listening to EsDeekid? Anyway, sorry, yeah, aside from that, Rebel is like really amazing. Fucking Timothée Chalamet just made a remix of Four Rules. 2025, man, that was a year. I would never have expected a Scouser to drop one of my favorite rap albums of the year, but it happened and I'm grateful for it. Hats off to you, EsDeekid. Obviously only metaphorically in this sense. I don't want to actually take my hat off right now. Lord, if you're out there, please make sure my roommate doesn't come home while I'm filming this last little bit. The last record I'm going to talk about today is the new Lausse the Cat album. When this album was announced, I was very excited. To illustrate how excited I was, I'm going to read you some real text messages that I sent after the announcement. This is the best news I've heard all year. I'm actually losing it. Mate, we're about to reach DEFCON 5. This is better than sex. Bro, this feeling is going to be better than the feeling I'll get when my first child is born. I can just tell. As you might be able to notice, I was quite excited about this album, but in my excitement, I began building up expectations in my head. I began to worry. Have I built up these expectations too high? Are they too much for the album to live up to? So, a few days later, when the album came out, I approached the track list with caution. I put on the first song. Okay, this is pretty good. Let's keep listening. By the time track 2 was over, I knew it was worth the hype. The Mocking Stars by Lausse the Cat not only matches these expectations, but it completely blows them out the water. It's so good, in fact, that the primary reason I'm making this video is because of this album. For those who don't know Lausse the Cat, let me put you on. In 2018, after only posting some early work on SoundCloud, Lausse the Cat released his debut album, The Girl, the Cat and the Tree. This album was not only a masterpiece, but many, including myself, consider it the greatest UK hip-hop album ever made. It tells an incredibly intricate story of the titular cat making his way through the world he lives in, facing challenges and reckoning with his sins. This story is told in a gripping and detailed way, to such an extent that I've never seen anything like this replicated in the years since its release. Following the release of this album, Lausse dropped 2 more singles this year, had a few features in 2019, and then vanished. For 6 long years, we heard nothing, and I mean nothing. I was honestly starting to believe that Lausse had passed away. I know that's obviously crazy, but I just couldn't begin to understand why he'd taken so much time off. Then, on a random Tuesday, without flair or preamble, Lausse posted on Instagram the trailer for his new album, coming out in just over a week. And so now here we are. Lausse is back to continue the story of the cat so many people became attached to all those years ago. It's very impressive how Lausse manages to make his album a sequel in every sense of the word. It's not only a story in the same world with the same characters, but it also doesn't serve as a replacement for the previous project. While both projects are very emotional and introspective, I would argue that this record trades some of the intimacy and detail of the last one for a grander stage and greater spectacle. Not to say that this album doesn't have details and specificities for the listener to get attached to, but on the whole, this story is much more wide and sprawling than the last. The best example of this, and what I consider to be one of the album's greatest achievements, is the title track. I'm going to avoid spoilers because if you haven't ever heard any of Lausse's music, I'd implore you to go in blind to the narrative. But this song is the first turning point in the story of the record. It's a 10-minute long epic that paints such a vivid picture of what's going on, and it's a masterclass in immersion and pacing. Especially the section in the middle. When I realized that those little vocal chops were actually lyrics that continued the story, I was completely blown away. There are so many moments like this throughout the album though, moments where I was just floored by the creativity on display. Whether it's the drum switch on I Don't Want to Get a Job, the saxophone on Midnight Hour, the cowboy bebop interpolation on Space Cadet Cat, or even the breaking of the fourth wall on Keep On Walking, they all keep the listener engaged in an album with a weaving story with many twists and turns. And I just know there'll be so many other little moments I find as I listen to this project over and over again. Beyond the storytelling, this record also made me realize that Lausse is actually a really, really good rapper. Obviously I should have known that, but I think so often I'm wrapped up in the immersion and the narrative and the characters that I don't notice how his flows or his wordplays are doing, but it's good as fuck. I'm lucky I'm not a UK jazz rap artist because the rest of the scene must listen to this shit and just go, what the fuck are we even doing? Like, what are we even doing? Speaking of jazz, this production is also incredible. It's just as gripping as the last record, but I felt this album had a lot more of a theatrical approach. Again, circling back to what I mentioned earlier when I'm talking about the title track, its pacing is very good. The gradual build and release of tension without being boring is amazing. I'm not sure how this always happens, but whenever I hear Lausse's music, I feel like I hear it at the perfect time. I first listened to The Girl, the Cat and the Tree towards the end of my time at university, and I really connected with that record because the kind of story he was telling was reminiscent of the experiences I had lived through and was soon leaving behind. The transition between teenage and adulthood through the crucible of drinking, love, and living with little responsibility is baked into the sound of that album. But with this album, I connect with it because I've left this aforementioned crucible, stepping into the quote-unquote real world and facing the often bleak and depressing reality that stands before us. And this is what that album is about to some extent. Throwing a little burden of existential crisis and ultimately finding comfort in the things and people who matter most to you, you have an album perfect for anyone going through any kind of change in their life. But even if that's not the case, and you can't relate to this album in a complete way, it's still an incredibly emotional journey. Seriously, if you listen to this thing from front to back, allowing yourself to be completely absorbed in the story Lausse is telling, submerged in his atmosphere and lyricism, and by the time the album comes to an end you don't have some powerful emotional feeling come over you, wipe yourself off, man. Because you did.
Bothering me, lonely cat felt oh so happy, his bulletproof fat and his suit started blossoming leaves. Slowly now here limbs with crack and broke twigs, so sadly he soon was a blossoming tree. Only when wings start flapping them downwards to catch roots growing at the bottom of your feet. Cat how does it always happen as soon as the mercy shake, I'm bothering me.
Thank you for watching my video. I know it's a bit all over the place and I know that I probably missed some albums that I really wanted to talk about. But to be honest with you, I really wanted to just get this out as soon as I can and move on to, more exciting projects in the new year. I will say though, the theme of this video and this year, I think for me by extension, is expectation. I hope you figured that out based on how many albums I talked about were tied to my expectations. But yeah, this year I really tried to get rid of those, or at least, be more aware of them. Whether it's music or whether it's where your life is going or who your friends are, just temper what you expect and roll with the punches and just push on in whichever way best suits you. 2026, man, we did it. Lots of love, have a good year and get an early night.